Welcome to The Follow-Up, a podcast by Coram Deo Church. In this podcast, we take the truths of Sunday and make them applicable for everyday life.
Welcome to The Follow-Up, everyone. My name is Billy Glosson, and with me, my matching friend, Michael Tooley. We went to this concert, and we bought the same hoodie.
There was only one hoodie.
And we knew there would be a time when we'd show up wearing the same hoodie. We did the same thing at Me Without You show.
That's like one of my favorite stories about your son.
Oh, he was like, "Why are you wearing Michael's shirt?"
Yeah, take my shirt off.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, welcome to The Follow-Up, everyone. Man, Michael, what's new, man? What are you thankful for?
What am I thankful for? Well, I had this all coincides very well with Ecclesiastes. I had just like a really interesting week last week, where I had this opportunity to go be with family and film a heavy video with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
She's got cancer, and we don't know how much time she has left and all that kind of stuff. And so a while back, she wasn't doing too hot, and she said, "I think we should film the video soon." And then she started feeling better, and she's like, "Maybe we can delay the video." And I was like, I think we should do it while you feel good. And so it was a little daunting emotionally going into that week, but God did so many things throughout the week. We had some really, really sweet times together, like just me and my mom. And then me and my immediate family like spent some time together, which without any extra folks around. And so it was just really precious. And so I'm thankful for God orchestrating that week and how it went. It went better than I could have imagined. So
yeah, I mean, it could have gone, we talked about it leading up to it. It's one of those things where it could have just been this daunting, like looming thing, but the Lord redeemed it. And that's beautiful,
absolutely.
Man. I love that. Let's see, for me, I guess the biggest thing I'm thankful for in this moment is we are officially in this facility.
Yeah.
The facility everything is legally transferred. We are done.
Yeah.
Yesterday was the last domino to fall. And so now I'm just it almost doesn't feel real.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm excited because I think the other thing is I spent the time like this week planning. Michael's preaching this upcoming Sunday. And so I've had a little bit more margin to get a lot of other things done. And one of the things that I've been praying through is next year's sermon calendar. And I want to start the year celebrating. It's something I don't do very well, and so I just want it to be like this big celebration of what God has done, and I have some ideas for that, so I'm pretty excited about that, just praying and dreaming.
Well, and in case nobody's like, I mean, we have just so many people following this podcast
thousands.
And watching on YouTube, yeah. To our 100K plus followers out there, it's kind of crazy just even looking back at the story of our church in the last year and a half, like the amount of things that have just kind of been.
A calendar year ago, we were still at Little Guatemala.
Yeah,
and
meeting on an indoor soccer field.
And I was planning for the downtown Halloween event. We had just gotten the new tablecloths. Like I remember very clearly, like we had just started conversations with Southside. Man,
we had just bought a house, and it was chaotic and. Church was exhausting.
Yeah.
Showing up every Sunday and putting everything together and then tearing it all down. And
very different now. Sundays are much more delightful.
So this is a good question for subscribers too. This is a good question for people that watch this. What strategy did you use to make this happen?
Yeah, that's a great thing. So I have a book I'll be putting out next year called I Don't Know What I'm Doing.
I was like, what?
No, I mean, really, like this was a situation where all I know is our previous experiences. And so we both came from the same sending church. And at that church, we had rented space from existing churches. And so we kind of just put the ask out. And when we drove up to this space, man, I don't know how else to describe it other than the Lord was just like, this is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I remember bringing you here and we prayed and just we walked around it. And it wasn't that it was the most incredible space ever. It was that it felt like the space that the Lord wanted us to be in. And so from there, we had favor in meeting here, and then just Southside made this decision to really, be generous and rather than see it just kind of taper off, they said, you know what, we want some of us want to join in with you. The rest of us might find a home elsewhere, but we want to give the space and everything to you. And so that was just such a shock.
That's the kind of stuff that it's a God moment. That's the kind of thing that you look at and you go, that's a only Jesus prayer. We didn't pursue this space.
No.
We didn't even ask.
No, in fact, I actually put stipulations in our lease that we wouldn't have any kind of discussions for both their sake and ours, so that we wouldn't feel pressured to try and make it work, and they wouldn't feel pressured to, that we're coming in trying to take over, and everything kind of went so well.
Yeah.
Yesterday we had our last thing, and I know she doesn't listen because she's not the most technologically savvy, but Miss Pat, one of the members of Southside who's joined in with us, just was talking to me, and she said, I'm glad that we got all this over and it's done, and I'm thankful. And she said, you said at the beginning of this process that this isn't easy. And I said, man, Miss Pat, you have no idea how much easier this was comparatively to other experiences, from both friends who've done this and from our past experience. And I just told her a few stories, and she was blown away. And she's like, man, God has been so good.
We have a lot to be grateful for as a church family.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's be sad together, Michael.
So I picked on Billy earlier today because I personally am not a huge Enneagram fan, but we've done Gospel Enneagram stuff in the past. And I said, man, this sermon series is really going to show off my 4, and it's really showing off your 7.
Yeah.
Because, and even my study of the passage that's coming up this coming week has already shown light on that. We don't want to live too long in the sorrow, and so we can find ways to cope and everything. But Ecclesiastes 3:11 is actually my life verse. So favorite book of the Bible. Everything is.
We're doing life verses, huh?
Yeah.
No, mine's 2 Corinthians 5:21.
I don't know what that is.
He made him who knew no sin to be sin, so that.
Okay. Well, I guess I could pick a Jesus,
no, it's fine.
Jesus life verse.
No, I'm kidding. It's not really my life verse. I just love that verse. I don't know what. Okay, this is. We should stay on this and stay on task. I don't know what a life verse is.
I don't necessarily either. I was listening to a book last week that I'm almost done with called To Be Told, and it's from a counselor guy that's talking about how to tell your story, and he honed in on trying to find the theme of your life. And so I guess that's where the idea of my mom shared her life verse in her video.
Well, I mean, this Google says it's a Bible verse or short passage of scripture that you reflect on and turn to frequently. So in that case, I guess 2 Corinthians 5:21 is that verse for me, because that verse changed my life. So sure, we can, if you have a life verse, don't come at me. I didn't know, I've heard it my whole life, and I've never been what does that mean? And I think it's hilarious because I'm a pastor. So let's keep going. So we did Ecclesiastes 3, and for all intents and purposes, this book is, I would say, less about being sad and more about being aware.
Yeah.
And especially in chapter 3, because, chapter 1 and chapter 2 are so somber, and chapter 3 is stark, but it's so rich, and just the way that the preacher teases out this idea of time, it's pretty eye-opening. And so I really enjoyed it. So Michael, why don't you just read verses 1 through 13 for us?
Sure. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man.
Yeah, so I will admit that this was probably the most excited I've been. So it's not that I don't like Ecclesiastes and I'm not excited to do it. Clearly, like I, prayed, sought the Lord, chose to do this. I could, have been like, nah, we're not doing it. We're doing something else. But the first 2 weeks were so somber and, stark. And then it felt like this was the first time that like reading it was like so clear and helpful for me. And so I went into it a little bit more excited. And so our big idea was that God's providence turns vanity to victory, or that the providence of God is the antidote to vanity in a meaningless world. And so I just think that this is such a clear passage about taking the mundaneness of time, realizing that we get stuck in this cycle of insanity. But if we look to the Lord, we see that he is the one who infuses it with purpose, with meaning, with hope, with joy. And so that was really helpful for me. So, Michael, why don't I ask this first question, which is, where have you seen God turning your personal trials into triumphs?
Man, the last 2 years of my life, constantly. It's interesting, too, because when I was trying to think of, like, practical application, a lot of the practical application for this passage is just, like, dwelling and abiding with God. There's not, like, active actions that we can go out and do. But, yeah, I mean, we bought our first home. 6 months later, I lost my job. Just all the transitions that have taken place, God has just continued to show up and provide more and better. That period of being without a job was like one of the sweetest times in our marriage of like growing our faith and like learning how to really trust God. We didn't have a choice, So there's still a lot of personal trials, but I think the biggest place where I can see God turning my trials into triumphs is more the answer to the prayer, God, will you strengthen my faith? I went and found it and wrote it down. I was surprised you didn't share the gospel primer quote, but
I've shared it so many times.
Yeah.
I think it was like, that's why I went with the Jared Wilson one, but
yeah,
go on.
That one was gold too.
Yeah.
But I'll just read the last little part of this. It says, the good news about my trials is that God is forcing them to bow to his gospel purposes.
Yeah, man.
And do good unto me by improving my character. I was listening to this book on the way home that my sister recommended, and it's called To Be Told. I already said that earlier. But this idea was put across. I was driving, so I couldn't like write down the quote, but I recorded a voice memo. The idea is that, we view trials as like a classroom. We think that God is trying to teach us something.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy just drives home the point. He's like, God isn't trying to teach you a lesson.
Yeah.
He's trying to transform your life.
That's really good.
And so it's just like, if we can look at a trial and say, I spent most of my younger life thinking about trials that way. Like, Lord, can I just learn the lesson and move on from this
just
trial?
Get through it.
And he is with us in the valley.
Yeah.
And he's trying to renovate your life. He's trying to put off the old self, to put it to death and give you a new self and give you himself. And so it's just, that's been like my biggest like moment of rejoicing, is just looking at this stuff and being able to go, I can see now a firmer trust in the goodness of God than I had a year ago at this time.
Yeah, man, I love that, because life is not Veggie Tales, right? Like, we're not just
no offense.
We're not here to get lessons. Like, God's not like, hey, let me give you, a lesson through this. He's giving us Jesus. Yeah. And when we believe and see that, we understand that nothing on this earth, no pain can compare to the goodness of Jesus. No goodness can compare to the goodness of Jesus. Man, I think of all the times that I've fretted And then I look back and see God's sovereign hand at work. Yesterday we had a guy come out looking at our crawl space to talk to us about putting a moisture barrier in. Exciting stuff. And I remember walking around the house with him, and he's just like, oh man, he goes, I really actually like love this house. He's young. He's like freshly married. He's like, this is like exactly what we want, like perfect starter home kind of thing. And he said, when did you guys buy this? I said 2020. He goes, man, you got this so cheap, didn't you? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you got that at a great rate. I was like, you have no idea. And it's funny because rewind, and I'm sitting there anxious, stressed. I don't think this is going to work out. Everything the house seems way too expensive, all these different things. And I look back and I see how much God provided for us, exactly what we needed when we needed it. And it's so wild to me how easy I can let little things like that become major things rather than having a steadfast hope. And that's why, even I shared his eyes on the sparrow on Sunday. And Marvin, the elder at Winnigan, who said to me, he makes everything beautiful in its time. Like, I can't help but get over that because he had so much joy despite a lot of pain in his life.
Yeah.
Losing kids, dealing with tragedies, and just was so joyful because of Christ. So that leads us kind of to the next question, which is, where in our lives do we need to trust God more like a child trusts a good parent?
I think it's all over for me. I mean, it's the same. It just so happens to be the same categories that I feel like I've grown a lot in trusting him in. It's like you were talking about buying a house, and like then you look back and you're like, oh, he provided. Mm-hmm. And then it's just like, then that next expense that comes up, or like, like I lost my job and like we were without want. Like God provided left and right. And then there's like a stressful time of bills or living paycheck to paycheck. And it's just like, oh, I don't know how we're going to make it ends meet, And so it's just like, he's not left.
Yeah.
He's right beside us. So that's for me.
I think that's good. We had our Quorum Deo men gather here, and it got interrupted a lot by one of the things about the area we're in is we're right by the railroad tracks. So loads of homelessness comes through here. And I remember just waking up Sunday morning and feeling a little bit inadequate. Like, man, how do I even, I want to help. I don't know how to help. And I'm trying to like game plan. And like, there's part of me that's like, okay, what do we do? How do we do this? And just the reality of like, Billy, the Lord brought us here.
Yeah.
He knows what he's doing. Do I trust him? And am I willing to like take these uncomfortable, inconvenient steps, which they are, but man, the Lord is so good in it. And so just praying for just wisdom and steadfastness to trust in him in the midst of that and not be the kind of person that frets and worries, but just depends on the Lord. I think that's huge. This isn't one of the questions, but what do you think about this idea of eternity being sown into our hearts, that our hearts are restless until they rest in him?
I think it's evident all around. I think it's evident in just the way that, I mean, even if you consider like a not yet believer, the way that they live their life is as if they're never going to die. Mm-hmm. And even at the height of like that, when YOLO first became like a hashtag, even at its peak, people still weren't living, they weren't taking the principle of that to be like, the reality of death. They were taking that principle of like, let's party because you only live once type thing. And still kind of this like happy ignorance of like the stark reality of the end. But I think that I don't think that's all just willful ignorance. I think that is God's design put on display in humanity, that we know that we weren't meant for this broken world. We know that we weren't meant to be in, like, every person, whether you're a believer or not, has this in your core. You know it's not supposed to be like this.
Right.
And that has to come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it either comes from just entitlement or it comes from the fact that we've been created.
Yeah. Man, I see and feel that in so many people who are just desperate for meaning, mm-hmm. for their life to matter and mean something. So how have you seen that eternity, like that eternal longing, settled in your own heart?
In my own heart. I think it directly correlates and coincides with suffering.
Interesting.
Because I can understand that my suffering has a purpose. But when I read in 1 Peter, when he says, though for a little while you may experience various trials, when he says a little while, that's offensive unless I can have an eternal mindset. Because I've been praying for decades for God to heal my wife. I've been praying for so long, for this or that prayer to be answered. But if I can, one of my resources that I put in my notes was The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. And this character is having this back and forth with a person that one person is in heaven who murdered somebody while he was on earth. And this other person has come up for a visit from hell. That's the premise of the book. A bus load of people from hell come up and they have the chance to stay in heaven if they want to. So this guy from hell sees his friend in heaven who murdered somebody, and they're having this argument back and forth, and they're like, yeah, but you killed so-and-so, and he says, I know, he's here. And he said, and he's outraged about time, and he says, well, he's like, I'll deal with that a different day, and this character says, there is no other day, all days are present now, this moment contains all moments. And it's like, leave it to C.S. Lewis to capture an elusive thought that hurts our brains if we try to think about it too much, about what eternity will actually feel like.
Right.
Because we are stuck in linear time. And so I think kind of tapping into this mindset of like, I can't experience time the way that God does, but the more that he shapes me, the more that he molds me, I can begin to think about time the way that God does.
Yeah.
And he says he's making all things new.
Yeah, man, that's the hope. I mean, for me, I was telling Michael this earlier, but this is the week that we found out we were pregnant in 2017, or that our first baby was due in 2017. And then last year we found out we were pregnant in a pregnancy that ended in miscarriage. And you can go to a place of grief and darkness that is Ecclesiastes, 3:1-8,
Yeah.
The world's broken. We do the same thing over and over again. We rejoice, but we also mourn. What's the purpose? And it can just feel hopeless. But the splash of cold water to the face is that he makes everything beautiful in its time.
Mm-hmm.
And that somehow, like you said, through suffering, he speaks. He speaks loud. And we would just encourage you, if you're listening or watching and you are suffering, and the Lord sees you and does not think lightly of your pain, does not think that you are not worthy of his time and attention. Christ is the evidence that you are.
It's important too to point out that, like, to say that there's beauty in the midst of what you just described, I think there's like a very close danger that could be like highly offensive. Like, how could you think such a thing? But you, as a believer with the Holy Spirit, you know that there's beauty in those moments. You know that in that season of life, like, there were people that showed up in ways that you could have never dreamt.
Yeah.
There were ways that God blessed you in ways. When I sit in a church pew someday, weeping tears with my family over the loss of my mom, when that day comes and that video plays on that screen, like, I know that God provided that moment. That's going to be a beautiful moment. I was sitting out there with my mom. God has done restorative work in our relationship. And even though there is so much pain in that moment, there's also this just beautiful reality that only God could orchestrate. And so it's not making your suffering trite. It's not saying, like, well, just look at the bright side. It's so much deeper and profound. It's saying, can you see anything beautiful about this moment? And most of us, our first answer is no. But then if we are willing to examine the question, we can see something beautiful. And that is where God is.
Yeah, and I would even say in those moments of, like, unbelievable atrocities and tragedy, when you physically cannot see anything beautiful, the whole point is that it's not in our time.
Yeah.
It's in his.
Yeah.
One day he will right every wrong, and he will redeem all things. Until then, we depend on him.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of leads us to a close here. As we think about a resource that we want to recommend, I want to highlight this book called Enjoy Your Prayer Life from Michael Reeves. It is teeny tiny, super short. One of my favorite books. I think it's like 60 pages, not even. It's 40 pages. It's like an article. It is so much about prayer, but it's so much about dependency. Something that if we're going to live a life in an Ecclesiastes world, we must do. We must be a dependent people. And so this is an excellent resource. But friends, we just want to encourage you as you continue to listen through this, to do the work, to sit in the sorrow and see the joy that the Lord brings. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, see you guys. Thanks for listening to the follow-up. We hope it illustrates well the gospel's relevance to every aspect of life. For more information about Coram Deo Church, visit us at our website, coramdeonc.com. You can also find us on social media at Coram Deo NC. And be sure to check out our podcast episodes for more sermons, devotions, and prayer. Music for this podcast comes from upbeat.io. It's music that's free for creators. Until next time, thanks for listening.